So as we kind of move into this, I guess I'd be, like to start off if I could, and maybe, what does the new remote workforce mean for security from your perspective? And
Shall I take that
either of
first?
you can.
Yep.
Yep.
I
Sure,
think
Mark.
there's
Thank you.
two different areas, I think, Tom. One is securing the workforce, and the other one is managing a security team and managing the security workforce to be able to do their job. And they're slightly different problems. So I think for a lot of companies, a movement towards digitization, hybrid working practices may have been in place before COVID, but it's clearly accelerated it. And I think that it's essential that companies review their threat models, their risk models, and understand the differences in their control environment that apply when people work from home or remotely significantly. But I think equally important, and something we're not talking about as an industry enough, is to think about how we actually deploy our security team, manage security teams, motivate security teams, achieve security outcomes in distributed environments. I think these are the two areas that we need to focus on. I don't know, Joey, if you've got any views on that.
Absolutely. I think that you're right. There are definitely two aspects to it. For us being in healthcare in the provider space, one of the biggest things that I saw that really has us looking forward at how we're going to handle that is there was a massive adoption of technology, of new technology. In our world, sure, telehealth was there, but patient and provider adoption was never really there. But it ushered in a whole bunch of new technology, from wearable devices and these kind of things at home. We had to deal with Alexas at home during patient sessions, right, to make sure those aren't recording things. And so the world of sort of at-home compute versus corporate environment converged, right? A lot of workforce pivoted that were not working in front of a screen all day, and now they were, right? In our world, we had a lot of providers who were working face to face, and then now all of a sudden they're in front of a screen, and they're finding their own ways to use technology to do that, even if we try to make it easy. So a lot of what we have seen is really the sprawl and the ubiquitous availability of technology is not going to slow down at any point, right? And so, we had to pivot our strategy to say, hey, we really need to train our workforce in a different way, in helping them to understand all the things that they see and deal with on a day-to-day basis, everything from how to keep their kids safe online to how to understand the nuances of social media settings and all these things. And that really kept them engaged, because we saw early on, as we looked at the shift to hybrid workforce, people got inundated with messaging from their companies, from HR, from finance, from all the different departments saying, hey, we're moving into this new kind of land. Here's what it is. And they kind of became desensitized to a lot of the messaging. And so we had to work on that. On the other side, with the teams, with the security team specifically, that's a real challenge. When I've been asked to speak to my board about the things that keep me up at night, I always say it's sort of a convergence of two things, right? When we think about the threat landscape, people tend to think about adversarial activity, but really that's only half the equation. The other half of the equation is the rate at which the business is adopting new technologies, for which a finite set of security team members have to suddenly become subject matter experts. And if they're not, we're still held accountable for it anyway. So that's a lot of accountability, right? So as we look at that and say, how are we going to be able to continue to take on this onslaught of new technology and keep it secure in a massively scalable way, and retrain our workforce members to understand how to be accountable for that and how to be successful in that endeavor.
So Joey, to that end, is there a particular project or initiative that you guys are rolling out that you're particularly excited about to kind of deal with challenges like this?
Well, I wouldn't say it's sort of a single project, but more of a strategy, right? And it kind of really is to what I just said. There's a couple things that we're looking at. One is, like I said, repositioning our workforce focus, and supplementing them with a lot more automation technology to cover the sprawl of everything that we have, right? Like many large organizations, we grow by acquisition, which means you're constantly inheriting environments at a different maturity posture, right? And you have to be effective in covering that gap and closing that risk pretty quickly. And so we need our humans to be focused on the things that they can. So, we have about 15 or 20 different technologies that we're looking at and contemplating rolling out to really drive that scalability and that automation, almost to build, an entirely new infrastructure, right? There's the infrastructure of identity that we have to build out and mature. There's the infrastructure of automation that's the underpinning for a lot of this traditional architecture. So we're working on that. I think the working model really is, in an ideal world, your defense in-depth architecture would be just as dynamic as the threats with which it's presented. I haven't yet met an organization that has been effective in that, but that's what we're looking at and saying, how do we close that gap there? How do we shift the economic model to make it more challenging for the adversary than the asset is worth if they were to get to it?
Mick, how about in Mimecast? Anything you guys are focusing on that would be good to share here?
A lot of what Joey just said resonates with me very much. I think there's two areas that I'd point out. One is actually strategy, or it's strategic in nature, which is actually the way we make decisions. So this is not a simple, it's a slightly abstract concept. It's not necessarily a technical control. It's not a single process or anything else, but it's actually looking at how we make decisions. So, you can't have a conversation like this without introducing the OODA loop somewhere along the line. So I'll be that person, and I'll use that phrase and say we're really trying to squeeze our OODA loop as fast as we can to as short a time frame as we can. And part of that is by ensuring that we make good decisions. So how do we take information and how do we fuse that information with other information to generate from situational awareness to what we really want, which is situational understanding, to be able to make that decision? How is that decision made? Is it made at a technical level in milliseconds, or is it made by a human being in a longer time frame? How do we equip human beings to make those decisions better? How do we equip them to understand the landscape, understand risk, etc.? So that's a real key piece of our strategy moving forward, and a lot of different moving parts. If I had to pick a particular thing, then I'd say, and this is aligned to what I've just said about squeezing the OODA loop. I said testing and validating, and moving to continuous testing and validating of our security posture. So there's a quote, I think it was Mark Twain, which is, it's not what you don't know that's going to hurt you, it's what you know with absolute certainty that just ain't so. Most breaches are in that domain, in that the things that we think we're doing or we believe we're doing, but we have no actual evidence of the fact we are, or not empirically, or the testing that we do is there is too much time between testing. So having a strategy for testing and validating that is effectively a stack that might range from, are we scanning our own external infrastructure every day, and are we taking that information and are we fusing it in the way that I've just said to make decisions and prioritization, so that the distance between observing a weakness and acting on it, orientating the resources that you have in acting, is very small, all the way through breach and simulation platforms that continually run and continually fed threat intelligence, through classic red teaming, capture the flag type things, and all the way up to the use of computer simulation to understand attack paths and to take into account what-if scenarios. Now, all of those things act in unison to help us to squeeze that decision-making cycle and improve our knowledge and our understanding. And we align that with what our security operations center do. So, you can't have another one of these calls without talking about purple teaming. And so actually doing that as well, but doing it rather than talking about it, and doing it every single day, and forcing the collaboration rather than relying on it to happen organically by creating the scaffolding and the structures, the roles, responsibilities to support it, and then demonstrating through the testing that I've referred to. This is the new world that we're living in. It's challenge your assumptions continuously and execute testing and validating your hypotheses all the time.
Absolutely. So to that end, in our what I'll call our new normal of a fully hybrid workplace, right? What are the biggest threats that we should be worried about that maybe they didn't exist before we kind of moved to this world? Is there anything, I'll start with you, Mick, this time. Is there anything that you're finding that exists new because now we're all working remotely, or we're kind of going back and forth between the office?
Not one thing. I think there are certainly things that are maybe come to the fore, in there. But I'd say it's really the thing that is different, and the thing that is changing is the degree in which we're encountering VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That is accelerating at a tremendous pace. Joey mentioned earlier on about the pace of absorbing new technologies. That's just one example of a driver of the volatility, the uncertainty, the ambiguity. You don't have people who are trained in it. Nobody. If you go to most organizations, there is no single one person or one single version of the truth as to how the technology is put together. People may have asset inventories, but that's just a library of individual assets. How they're connected, what the pathways are. There's a great quote by somebody, I forget who it was, that the reason attackers win frequently is because they understand your network better than your defenders. And I think that pace of change, that acceleration, and you can introduce into that the hybrid working, you can introduce into it the evolution of artificial intelligence, buzzwordy as it is, the evolution of that, the changing way that the delivery models are beginning to evolve. Most organizations are not fortunate to be fully cloud native. They're going to have some kind of hybrid environment in which they're trying to manage extended supply chains, hugely extended supply chains. And that lack of understanding and knowledge about the foundations that you're standing on, that's what's changing radically, that pace of that, which is why strategies moving forward need to account for the reality, not what the perception or what's drawn on the board is. This is what prescribed, but this is actually what's happening. And we need security strategies that deal with that.
Joey, what about from your side? I think you're on mute, Joey. There you are. Yep, we just lost Joey's audio.
I can still hear you, Tom.
So, Joey, I'm not good enough to read your lips and transition, but we'll do our best here. Maybe we can figure it out. So again, Mark, and listening to the things we've been talking about, and trying to kind of position them into many of the conversations that I'm fortunate enough to have on a daily basis with people like yourself. Realistically, what I'm seeing is the continued, and Joey pointed this out, the continued pushback, if you will, that we've experienced, and really the continuous need to get past it. So again, you could be looking at something as simple as doing a vulnerability scan, and you identify vulnerabilities, and the first thing your developer is going to tell you is that's not real, that's fake, that's not, that's a false positive, or what it might be. So again, looking at the means by which I can improve that process, right? How do I identify what's real and what's Memorex, right? How do I break them apart so that people are focusing in the right way? And I think that the technologies that we're seeing kind of being introduced now are allowing us to get there. Joey, you're back. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay.
Welcome back.
All right. Sorry about that.
Not an issue. I'm going to let you go, Joe. If you want to jump in on what we were just talking about.
Do you want me to jump in? I don't know where I got dropped off.
Not a problem. So again, what we had the opportunity to do was we were talking about the different threats that maybe didn't exist before we moved to this fully hybrid workplace, and Mick gave us some very good examples. I think you were about to start to give some from your perspective, and that's where we lost you.
Oh yeah, I think in our world, we were well positioned to move to distributed workforce environment. Didn't really matter where you were; the tooling was there. I think for a lot of organizations that was a challenge. We did see again, it was kind of to what Mick was saying, just a rapid adoption of new technology, right? Again, in our world, we had a telehealth offering going into COVID. Within 3 months, we had 24. And so that was a rapidly converged timeline. The patient adoption of the technologies for wearables and things like that went through the roof, right? So there's all these new devices connecting in. The convergence of sort of that corporate owned technology infrastructure that we owned and controlled, even if you contemplate things like BYOD, really got the lines got blurred. We had to have doctors practicing at home and making sure the kids Cortana or Echo wasn't in the room capturing things. There was a lot of stuff like that. The other really big change that I've seen is not a technology problem. We're kind of talking about the human aspects of things, and it is the human aspect of fatigue, right? I think especially in our world, but I think probably for everyone, it took a long time to kind of get to this point of vaccination, and everyone thought, hey, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But the problems are still compounding, and the Delta variant has come, and I see workforces pretty much everywhere are completely exhausted, and they've lost that sort of cultural engagement. Even for really strong cultural companies that put a lot on that, you have a workforce that's just exasperated, and it makes their defensive instincts kind of muted to a degree. And we've seen that play out. So I think sort of the convergence of that. Along with obviously, the cyber attacks aren't abating in any way. So I know for my own team, one of the challenges has been they spent the past 7 holidays in a row working. So an already exhausted workforce, that just miss their holidays with their families and all of that, that's really starting to catch up and take its toll. So, I think that the problems aren't always technical in nature.
And Tom, have you got
So,
time for me to
as we
Tom, do you have-
absolutely. Go ahead.
So you used the example, which is about pushback, and you used an example, just one example, about developers and potential vulnerabilities, false positives, and such like. So just a quick comment. I think a lot of security teams, understandably, engage in conversations at a tactical level. They engage with conversations about an individual vulnerability with an individual developer. That conversation is always going to be fractious. Always. It's the nature of it. But I think a lot of security teams, or risk teams, or whoever's responsible, need to at least engage in a conversation at a more operational or strategic level. So that conversation should be with more senior officers of the organization about the level of risk that the organization has, the level of risk to the organization's objectives. So it's not a technical conversation. It's a conversation about how much confidence do we have that our products or our assets or our services are resilient to cyber attack. What would it mean if they're not? That changes the dynamic. There's no point having a conversation with an individual developer. You need to have a conversation with the people who can change the environment and the dynamic within it. And I think this is a failing that a lot of security teams have. I understand why that conversation takes place. It's necessary for it to take place. But the ability to communicate at this different level with the right people is often missing. And in my experience, the right conversation at that level often means that those technical blockers diminish significantly. I don't suggest they go away completely, but they diminish significantly. And that's a critical point here about how we present and who to.
Absolutely. So as we come to an end here, I want to thank both Mick and Joey. I obviously, these are conversations that we've seemingly been having for quite some time, and we keep revisiting similar challenges. That being said, the only way we know we're going to be able to keep moving forward is keep focusing on them. So these conversations, to my at least thoughts, are continually valuable.